You're watching International News Desk live on ECWA Television Africa. Many thanks for joining us. I am Lois Dureki. Here are news stories making international headlines. The United Nations approves change of Turkey's official name to Turkey. China depends on state-run banks for $120 billion to improve economy. A new gun rampage, 4 killed in Oklahoma, police says. Shadowy pro-military militias target Myanmar's anti-coup movement. And Israeli soldiers murder 2 Palestinians in occupied West Bank. Here are details of our major stories and other stories. The United Nations has changed the Republic of Turkey's country name at the organization from Turkey to Turkey following a request from Ankara for the change. On Wednesday, a letter had been received from the Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu, addressed to Secretary General Antonio Guterres, requesting the use of Turkey instead of Turkey for all affairs, United Nations spokesman Stephanie Dujarric said. The spokesman said the country name change became active from the moment the letter was received. Cavusoglu announced the letter's official submission to the United Nations and other international organizations on Tuesday. Turkey began the move to change its internationally recognized official name in English to Turkey in December after Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan released a memorandum and asked the public to use Turkey to describe the country in every language. Turkey is accepted as an umbrella brand for our country in national and international fairness. Erdogan said at the time, Turkey is the best representation and expression of the Turkish people's culture, civilization and values. Erdogan also advised companies to use made in Turkey for their exported goods and instructed state agencies to use Turkey in their correspondence. On business and economy, China is veering to state-owned policy banks once again to help rescue an economy under strain, commanding them to make available 800 billion yuan, that's $120 billion in funding for infrastructure projects. The incentive, announced at a state council meeting chaired by Premier Li Keqiang, could help finance a substantial mass of infrastructure costs this year and give some break to local governments battling with dropping revenues. President Xi Jinping has called for an all-out effort to increase infrastructure this year, turning on an old playbook of driving up growth through public investment. Funding the additional spending has confirmed to be tricky, though after a drop in land sales and widespread COVID outbreaks battered government revenue. Standard Chartered forecasts infrastructure investment will raise 10 to 15% this year, although that may still not be sufficient to offset the headwinds to economic growth. Economics estimated China's infrastructure spending came to 23 trillion yuan in 2021. Beijing's calls for quicker application of growth-boosting strategies have strengthened since official data showed that economic activity contracted in April and unemployment rose sharply. High-frequency indicators proposed the decline continued in May, leading Li to caution last week of risk from a possible year-on-year contraction in the second quarter. Numoran Holdings Limited approximates the government has a 6 trillion yuan funding gap this year, created in part by a sharp contraction in revenue from land sales, a major source of funding of infrastructure investment by local governments. The 100 billion yuan funding publicized by the State Council accounts for nearly half of the 1.65 trillion yuan in new policy bank lending in 2021, economies led by Lu Teng wrote. On gun violence and crime, on Wednesday, police said a man armed with a rifle and a handgun opened fire inside a medical building in Oklahoma, killing 4 people, the latest of a series of mass shootings in the United States. The gunman also died seemingly of a self-inflicted wound, Tulsa's Deputy Police Chief Eric Dalgish said, according to reports outside the St. Francis Hospital, and police were trying to determine the man's identity but said he was aged between 35 to 40. The shooting comes 8 days after 18-year-old man armed with an automatic rifle burst into Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Uvalde, Texas, and killed 19 children and 2 teachers before he fatally shot himself, and just more than 2 weeks after a shooting at a Buffalo supermarket by a white man who is accused of killing 10 black people in a racist attack. The site of the St. Francis Hospital was sealed off when police learned of the attack at the Natalie Medical Building, which houses an outpatient surgery center and a breast health center, on Wednesday afternoon. Joe Biden, U.S. president, has been informed on the Tulsa shooting, the White House said in a statement, adding that the administration had offered support to local officials. Despite the new mass shootings, gun regulation faces profound resistance in the United States from most Republicans and some rural state Democrats. Biden, who visited Uvalde over the weekend, assured earlier this week to continue to push for reform, saying, "I think things have gotten so bad that everybody is getting more rational about it." Some important federal lawmakers have also stated careful optimism, and a bipartisan group of senators worked through the weekend to pursue conceivable areas of compromise. They reportedly were concentrating on laws to increase the age for gun procurement or to permit police to confiscate guns from people considered a threat to themselves or others, but not an outright bar on high-powered rifles like the weapons used both in Uvalde and Buffalo. The body of a man was discovered deserted by the side of the road in Myanmar's central city of Mandalay. A month ago, the victim had been stabbed multiple times and his hands tied behind his neck. Attached to a land yard around the neck of National League for Democracy (NLD) member Zhao Gui, the murderers had left their calling card, a red circle depicting a warrior holding 2 swords. The circle is the symbol of a new pro-military death squad terrorizing Myanmar called Thwa Tuop Au, which roughly translates to the blood-drinking group. Zhao Gui was among 14 party members or supporters killed by Thao Thok or similar groups between April 21st and May 5th, according to an NLD statement, including the brother of a party lawmaker and an NLD village administrator. Since then, the violence has continued. The NLD won a landslide victory in the elections of November 2020, but the military rejected the results, instead seizing power in a coup. When the country vented in mass protests, the new regime killed hundreds, and opponents of the takeover turned to armed revolution. The military leadership, which calls itself the State Administration Council, is struggling to assert control over the country and is stretched thin, fighting wars on multiple fronts. In the midst of the chaos, gloomy pro-military groups have started emerging, like Thao Tok and paramilitary militias known as the Pure Swati. The Mandalay activist said Thao Tok is believed to be connected to the ultra-nationalist Buddhist hardline group Mabatha, which was barred under the NLD, and infamous anti-Muslim monk Rathu. He said this poses a great concern to those of other religions, especially the Muslim community. Now, 2 Palestinians were murdered by Israeli soldiers in the occupied West Bank in separate incidents. According to the Palestinian Ministry of Health, on Thursday morning, Aman Mahmoud Misan, 29, was killed during a pre-dawn Israeli military attack on the Denshi refugee camp in the southern city of Bethlehem. He was the 3rd Palestinian to be shot dead in the occupied West Bank in less than 24 hours, a father of 3 and a former prisoner who spent 3 years in Israeli jails, Palestinian prisoner rights groups said. Late on Wednesday, the ministry said separately Israeli forces killed 24-year-old Bilal Awad Kwabaha during a raid on the village of Yabad outside of Jenin City in the northwestern West Bank. The army had attacked Yabad in the evening to destroy the home of Dai Hamershen, who carried out a shooting attack on March 29th in the town of Bnei, killing 5 people. He was killed in a shootout with Israeli police at the scene. The army also arrested Hamash's 59-year-old father, Ahmed, after the demolition. Israel destroys the homes of Palestinian assailants as part of a strategy that has long been criticized by right groups as collective punishment towards their families and towns. Hostilities broke out with the Israeli army in Yabad shortly after the raid began, with so many serious live ammunition injuries reported. Israeli forces shot dead Palestinian female journalist Gufran Warasneh, who is 31, at the entrance to the Arab refugee camp north of Hebron in the occupied West Bank on Wednesday morning. On May 11th, the Israeli army shot dead Al Jazeera correspondent Shirin Abu Akleh while she was covering a military raid in Jenin. Israeli forces also attacked a funeral procession in occupied East Jerusalem in an attempt to prevent it from advancing on foot. According to the Palestinian Ministry of Health, Israeli forces have killed 61 Palestinians since January 1st. Local and international rights groups have condemned what they call Israel's excessive use of force and shoot-to-kill policy against Palestinians, including suspected assailants in the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip. Senior Israeli politicians, include Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, have encouraged the use of a lethal force and given orders to shoot Palestinians who did not pose an imminent threat. The United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has noted in reports that Israeli forces often use firearms against Palestinians on mere suspicion or as a precautionary measure in violation of international standards. On most stories, Queen Elizabeth offers thanks amid Platinum Jubilee celebrations. Queen Elizabeth II has appreciated all those involved in her Platinum Jubilee celebrations ahead of 4 days of pomp, parties, parades and public holidays to herald her record-breaking 70 years on the British throne. On Thursday, millions of people across the world and the United Kingdom are expected to join the festivities, beginning in honor of the 96-year-old who has ruled for longer than any of her predecessors. The celebrations commenced with the Troop in the Colour military parade in central London at 9 o'clock GMT. The Queen was expected to join the working members of her family on the balcony of Buckingham Palace at the end of the event when 70 aircraft were set to roll overhead. There will also be gun salutes in the capital, across the United Kingdom and from Royal Navy ships at sea at midday, while in the evening beacons will be lit across the country and the Commonwealth, with the Queen leading the lighting of the principal Platinum Jubilee beacon at her Windsor Castle home. In Africa, global energy crisis felt at the pump in South Africa. South Africa is facing the tweak of petrol price surges due to the global energy crisis following Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its effects on the Brent crude oil price. The impact is also being felt in neighboring Zimbabwe and other African countries, including the East African nation of Uganda. Africa's most developed economy dodged a record fuel price rise on Tuesday as the government declared it will elongate the decrease of the fuel levy announced for April and May to June and July. Economic experts is cautioning of additional increases throughout the year, which will hit consumers already dealing with rising food, electricity and transport costs. Economist and University of Witwatersrand, Professor Gianni Russo, said more increases should be expected throughout the year. He added that the major impacts will be felt by the poor who are already facing economic strife. The fuel price rise is the newest addition to the country's economy's woes, which include a 34.5% unemployment rate, stagnant economic growth, and the economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, which resulted in the loss of an estimated 2 million jobs. 93 and 95 unleaded petrol increased by R2.43, that's $0.16, and R2.33, that's $0.14% per liter respectively overnight, just short of reaching $1.60 mark. Diesel has also increased in 1.10, that's $0.07 overnight, and will have been more without a reduction in of the general fuel levy by $0.10. Announcing the increases, the government said the average price of Brent crude oil has increased from $104.78 to $115 to 108.04 euros. Among the major contributors were the rising demand amidst the summer driving season in the Northern Hemisphere and the European Union deliberations concerning sanctions on crude oil and petroleum products from Russia. Still on the news, President Kais Saied relieves dozens of judges as he consolidates rule. On Wednesday, Tunisia's president relieved 57 judges, accusing them of corruption and protecting terrorists as he pursues to remodel the country's political system after consolidating one-man rule. According to reports, Kais Saied said he had given opportunity after opportunity and warning after warning to the judiciary to purify itself. Hours later, the official gazette published a decree announcing the dismissals. Yusuf Bazauka, the former head of the Supreme Judicial Council, which Saied dissolved in February, was amongst those sacked. The council had acted as the major sponsor of judicial independence since Tunisia's 2011 revolution, and the move triggered accusations that Saied was meddling in the judicial process. Another key casualty of the purge was Bachir Akremi. Some political activists said the judge is too close to another party and accused of him of stopping cases against it. Ennahda and Akremi both denied the allegations. Saied dismissed the government and seized executive power last July before setting aside the 2014 constitution and dismissing the country's elected parliament. He has been ruling by decree ever since, claiming he needed to take action to save Tunisia from crisis. Initially, his moves appeared to win public support after years of economic stagnation, political paralysis, and corruption, but public anger is growing amid high inflation and unemployment and declining public services. Saied, who has also taken control of the once independent Electoral Commission, has said he will introduce a new constitution this month that put it to a referendum in July. However, nearly all of Tunisia's political parties have rejected the move, along the powerful UGTT Labour Union, saying public sector will go on strike on June 16th, posing the biggest direct challenge to Said's power grab so far. Kenya marks 59 years of self-rule. On Wednesday, Kenya celebrated 59 years of self-rule. Thousands had assembled at the Uhuru Gardens of Nairobi to mark Madaraka Day. Dignitaries such as the first couple of the Republic of Sierra Leone, the diplomatic corps, VP William Ruto, and politician Raila Odinga are among the crowd that the president addressed the nation. Madaraka Day is significant in our history because it is on this day in June 1963 that our founding fathers of our nation replaced the outgoing colonial government and formed the first indigenous government of Kenya. If Uhuru Kenyatta headed the Kenya Defense Force parade in Nairobi, celebrations resumed this year in all counties. For his last ceremony in office, Kenyatta invited his people to consider stability when voting for the next election. This forthcoming election, general elections on the 9th of August 2022, is to choose peace and stability over fear, hope over faith, and progress over retrogression. Kenyatta can no longer stand for re-election, but his deputy Ruto and his now ally Odinga are just two among a record number of aspiring candidates. And finally, Nigeria's Muhammadu Buhari on state visit to Spain to boost cooperation. On Wednesday, Muhammadu Buhari, Nigeria's president, met with Pedro Sanchez, Spain's prime minister, at Moncloa Palace in Madrid, in what is the first visit to Spain by a Nigerian head of state in 17 years. Muhammadu Buhari was received Wednesday by the Spanish Prime Minister. Pedro Sanchez had invited the Nigerian leader for a 3-day state visit. Ademola Siriki, the Nigerian ambassador to Spain, celebrated the moment, which is the first visit to Spain by a Nigerian head of state in 17 years. The Spanish head of government called Nigeria a tactical partner important for stability and economic growth in Western Africa. Both leaders had held a meeting followed by the signing of agreements and memorandums of understanding pitched towards more enhancing of bilateral relations. The two nations dedicated to growing cooperation in areas such as mutual legal assistance, energy, and the fight against crime and terrorism. Buhari was accompanied by an 11-man delegation, and he also met with Spanish King Felipe VI. The president will be the special guest at an investment forum organized by the Spanish Chamber of Commerce, the Ministry of Trade, and the Confederation of Employers, where he will address Spanish and Nigerian business owners. He will speak of the investment opportunities in Africa's highest economy and ways of expanding the volume of trade. On June Third, Muhammadu Buhari is expected to be back in the country. Earlier, I said United Nations approves change of Turkey's official name to Turkey. And China depends on state-run banks for 120 billion to boost economy. In new gun rampage, 4 killed in Oklahoma, police says. Shadowy pro-military militias target Myanmar's anti-coup movement, and Israeli soldiers murder 2 Palestinians in occupied West Bank. And that's you up to date with international news stories. Remember, do what is right, not what is easy, not what is popular. From all of us at Equa Television, have a good night.